Hello there guys, and welcome back to the channel. So before the season started, I kind of made my MVP offensive and defensive predictions for the victory track conflictor meta. And now, well, it's time to do a follow-up video on it for two reasons. Number one, I have actually had the time to play the meta itself, and whilst many of the predictions came through, there were some surprising results as well. And then on top of it all, I have just this morning reached Gladiator Circuit, and Gladiator Circuit meta, even though it's very similar in the sense that the same nodes plus perforate, plays very differently, and my deck has already been changed, and there are some champions that work in victory track and do not work well at all in Gladiator Circuit. And there are quite a few champions that become a lot more dangerous in Gladiator Circuit due to the increased amount of power gain that people get from Conflictor, and as well as the perforate and unblockable special attacks. So Gladiator Circuit meta is quite a bit different, and before my mind kind of overly focuses on the Gladiator Circuit meta, I wanted to give this kind of like final victory track conflictor advice video on the MVP champions that, well, helped me the most overall. And most importantly, here we can start with Spot. Spot is an absolute maniac because he is significantly tougher to deal with on defense because of the nodes, and he is also significantly tougher to deal, well, on attack. He's much better attacker. The reason he works very well as a defender on conflictor meta is because if he uses level 1, he inflicts a debuff on himself, thus gaining back 75% of those charges, and on top of that, obviously gaining another spot on himself. And the other bit is that he's one of those champions that you do want to parry and be careful with when you hit him, because whenever he's ready to go untouchable, you do need to bait that out somehow. And with Conflictor, it just becomes a lot harder. So that kind of explains why he's quite tough defensively. And offensively, well, he just nukes everything with level 2. That's about it. Because of the arms race node increasing damage on special attacks based on opponent's power level. With Spot in the vast majority of the matches, you just basically need to get level 2. So he's extremely valuable defender and an attacker. And he's one of the most valuable champions for this meta in particular. The second biggest MVP, the top 3, I guess I'm going to list in specific order. The rest of them are a bit jungled up. But the second one is Jugs. Jugs is just an absolute monster. He's been doing 20-second, 25-second fights for me throughout. I have a rank 4 Juggernaut, and yeah, he probably has the highest win rate of all the champions that I have been using, just because he doesn't inflict debuffs on his base unless you kind of mess up and hit opponent with those 10 unstoppables, well, the block break thing, and the fact that he gets to his level 2 quicker because he has improved combat power rate per unstoppable. And the final bit is yeah, just massive damage. For many of the smaller health pool opponents with Juggernaut, I just never bother baiting out a single special attack. I just build up to like level 2 until opponent is nearly at 3 bars of power, then drop a full combo and just go for a level 2. And he's been nuking down virtually everything. He's been destroying America Chavez's, Nick Fury's, and you name it, he kills it. Infamous Iron Man's and all the other, most of the other tough matchups. So yeah, Juggernaut has been an absolute MVP for me in victory track. Moving on, Ghost. And Ghost is actually even better in Gladiator Circuit, but even on victory track, due to arms race, her having that increased level 2 damage, basically, even if you're not running Liquid Courage Double Edge, can let you finish off fights in a single special attack, especially if you manage to weave in a heavy attack, get like additional Fury or Cruelty. And yeah, Ghost has been just absolutely phenomenal offensively, dealing with a ton of different problems like Rintress. You can use Ghost extremely efficiently against Rintress, and then a ton of other opponents. Typically like one level 2 or level 2, level 1, and the fight is over. And obviously with her power gain, if you have her at a relatively high sig, you're going to be able to do that very quickly. Again, I've had a bunch of 20+ second fights with her. Now moving a bit further, Quicksilver. And Quicksilver is just absolute menace on defense. Unless opponent has a very good counter or they are very skilled at dealing with Quicksilver, there will be problems. And the problem starts with the fact that he requests to be parried a lot by vast majority of the champions, because you do want to bait out that evade. So you need to parry him, he gains a chunk of power. Then you parry him again, and he will evade you. And then maybe you squeeze in a third parry, or you need to trigger Conflictor again. And then it's just a whole lot of timer watching. And then on top of it all, if you do evade him, you have a chance to get a whiplash on yourself, which you want to get rid of by parrying. And basically, you're kind of forced to consistently trigger Conflictor. So unless you're using something like Kingpin or presumably, possibly Shang-Chi or Crossbones, he's very, very, very tough to deal with. Now, Spot can cheese him as well, kind of, but it becomes worse if opponent is running recall masteries, especially in Gladiator Circuit, because then he already starts with 1 bar of power, and he drops his level 1, and then he bypasses the miss mechanics and everything else, and the fight just can go downhill. I probably lost more matches in this meta to Quicksilver than anybody else, and I'm not that bad at fighting him normally. It's just in this meta, he's absolutely atrocious, to the point where, you know, I'm probably just gonna start banning him, because he's been kicking my teeth in left, right, and center, and it really, really annoys me. And yeah, so he's crazy good defender. He can be used offensively if you play very carefully, but he's not the best offensively, I'd say, in this meta, but definitely as a defender, he's crazy good. Now, moving on, Scorpion. Scorpion is one of those champions that works extremely well in the victory track, and then in the Gladiator Circuit, he works significantly worse. And that is just because the Conflictor is more potent, and opponents gain too much power to a point where, yeah, you spend the entire fight baiting out special attacks, and you can't really keep applying enough debuffs. But on victory track, he has been the answer to a ton of the most dangerous fights. Obviously, he can be a solid defender as well, without a doubt, but definitely his real prowess is offensively. You can take care of those Man-Things, Sasquatches, Dr. Dooms, Absorbing Mans, a ton of annoying champions. He's also relatively solid against the Thing in this meta, and yeah, a whole chunk of different champions. So Scorpion has definitely been one of my offensive MVPs. Moving on, Kitty Pryde. And Kitty Pryde is also kind of similarly self-explanatory to Ghost. Her special attack has, especially when you're phasing, has very high crit chance, and you deal a ton of damage. And if you shoot it when opponent has like 2+ bars of power, unless you're going up against the Rintra or something, you're basically going to be nuking everything down with a single level 2. So she's very fast, very, very dangerous offensive champion. There's just no way around it. She works as an extremely versatile nuke in this meta, and she's been very, very good. And the next champion, it's kind of a surprise. And now calm down. Yes, it's Jubilee. And yes, I am fully well aware of the amount of crap that I have talked about Jubilee. And I still stand by it. Jubilee, by virtually all reasonable measures of success, is an absolute garbage. But for one reason or another, in this meta particular, she works extremely well. In a similar nature, kind of like Kitty, where if you have 12 prowesses and you drop your level 2, virtually everything's going to die. And because of her energy attack, she's quite suitable as a core counter. Obviously, the fact that you do need to time everything can be a bit tricky, and this is just one of those things where champion seems to fit perfectly what the requirement is and how the meta has shaped up. And yeah, Jubilee does a very solid job. There's not much to it. It kind of bugs me, kind of annoys me, but I did take her to rank 3 because she does work well. And there is just no real questioning it. You can use her against Nick Fury, you can use her against Korg, you can use her against a whole bunch of different champions, because her prowesses are permanent, so they do not expire, so they will not be triggering Mystic Dispersion, so she can be used against some Mystic champions as well. And yeah, she works well in this meta. So to a point where I did end up taking her to rank 3. And moving on, Penny Parker, and this is again mainly offensively, as she obviously can work defensively as well, without a doubt, because increased amount of power gain, you know, if she throws the level 1s, then that can complicate the fights quite quickly. But in reality, we all know that, you know, there are more than enough Penny Parker counters available in this meta. The real reason why she works this well is, again, the improved special damage. And in this meta, with one level 1 and one level 2, you can basically nuke anything down. And that level 2 will have increased incinerate damage as well. It is quite easy to line things up with her because you're not rushing, because you do not need the double level 2s to activate it. And you can finish most fights in about 40-50 seconds, where you just get to your level 1, drop that, get your level 2, parry just before activating your level 2, drop this. Most opponents will drop dead from the level 2 damage itself, but if they don't, you can place some massive incinerates on them, and they're gonna go down in flames. And the rest of the abilities that we have on her, access to the passive heal block, access to poison and incinerate immunity, just come quite a bit in handy when you're going up against some other annoying defenders. Her not having any buffs in her base kit means she can be used against champions of Mystic class, like, you know, Man-Things and Dr. Doom, so on and so forth. And she's been very useful to me offensively in this meta. Moving on, we have Idum. Idum is a solid defender here as well, because increased amount of power gain. Obviously, he can throw specials. And if he does throw his level 1s, then he activates his Aura of Iron, and then he makes it, you know, trickier to play against him. But the real trick is offensively, where once you get your level 2, and it can be a bit tricky, and in Gladiator Circuit he doesn't really work, so I actually ended up taking him out of the deck because opponents just gain too much power. But in Victory Track, you still need to be quite careful with Conflictor and obviously the amount of power you give to opponent. But once you have reached 2 bars of power and you are ready to throw your level 2, if you have lined things up properly, opponents can take a ton of damage if they are about 2 bars of power, because your natural abilities are giving you a ton of attack increase. And then you can gain that 200% attack increase from the node, and you get like a massive power burn with mega power burn damage that will knock out most champions with a single level 2, aside from like Rintro or something like that. But yeah, he's definitely very, very good in Victory Track, not as good in Gladiator Circuit. And CGR just still does his 20-something% fights. Now, my problem with CGR is that I have had like 5 different fights where I kind of go all out, hoping that I will KO the opponent, and my opponent remains with like 2 or 3 or 5% health after the level 2, because in order to kind of like try and rush this, because it can be a nuke meta, you sometimes have to just risk it, and I seem to get very unlucky with CGR, but overall, can definitely absolutely nuke things down. Obviously, it can be a bit trickier because of Conflictor, because Conflictor can eat your Damnation debuff, so you do not get the extra armor breaks and stuff like that. But still, that mega level 2 damage, with the fact that you can get to your level 2 quicker than virtually any other champions in the game, just means that CGR is extremely, extremely dangerous champion. And yeah, he's been putting in a ton of work. Then Galen. Now, Galen is super effective because of a couple of reasons. Number one, in his base kit, he doesn't really debuff the opponent aside from his level 2. So you can completely play around Conflictor relatively efficiently. And even though he doesn't really benefit from the increased damage on his special attacks, obviously we all know that Galen can take most champions in the game in about 45 to 60 seconds, which is still relatively quick time. The fact that he counters some of the harder to counter champions, like Thing, for instance, he can still be an amazing Thing counter in this meta. The additional usefulness of Galen comes from increased amount of power gains from Conflictor, because whenever you fight Galen, unless you have a perfect counter, and I'm talking something like Tiger or something of the sort, you pretty much always are put on this tug of war where you need to time your special attacks after Galen's special attacks, but you know, if you trade it 1-for-1 and considering the standard combat power rates, eventually Galen will reach Harvest. And in the metas where Galen gains extra power, that happens more often, and it can be so much more punishing. If you just parry him by accident once, you know, you might end up eating full-on Harvest damage. and then you also can't do much. Meanwhile, well, he's unstoppable, so on and so forth. So he's much more dangerous defensively in this meta than he normally would be as well. And then we have another pain in the butt. This guy does not have many great counters in this meta, or at the very least many fast counters. And the reason for it is, he's one of those champions where you need either very specific counter that bypasses miss, or you need to play against this Spidey in a very specific way, which typically would involve either parry and heavy or parry and 4 light hits, so you do not trigger the miss mechanic. For those of you who do not know, the astral form triggers when you or he would be connecting with a medium attack. So light attacks, special attacks, heavy attacks are quite safe from that. The problem with that is that in a meta like this, parrying gives them a lot of power, and he himself gains plenty of power. And obviously he's a mystic, and he forces you to dex, and then he can copy those buffs, and then the fights can go extremely downhill. The other problem with this guy is that many of his counters require a debuff or are just not very suited to this meta. So in most cases, there's like Nick Fury that can relatively bypass and deal with this guy. There is Quicksilver potentially, but that fight's not as easy either. Then there is who else was good against him? Obviously there's Torch. Spot can deal with this guy quite well, just because of the fact that you can quite easily get your light attack openings. So Spot is quite a good option, and there are a few more, but the fact that you need to parry, give him a ton of power, and then, you know, you can do some damage, it just really slows down the fight. And if you make a mistake, he can be very punishing. So he's been an absolute nightmare defensively, and as a champion, obviously, he also can function very well offensively, so he's quite an effective dual threat, I would say. Moving on, we have Ebony Maw. And with Ebony Maw, the thing is relatively simple and similar as it is with Spidey. Number one, he's quite hard to parry. Number two, you do want to parry him in most cases to knock him down. So most of his attacks are projectiles, so you need to, you know, hope you get quite lucky and he plays into medium light and he doesn't go medium or medium heavy. First time you do that, he's going to shrug off the parry and gain a bunch of power. And then when you do it again, you know, there's just a lot to manage. So he is quite a tough guy to go up against. Not to mention the fact that if he throws 2 level 1s in quick concession, you're going to end up taking the degen damage. So yeah, Ebony Maw is quite rough. More rough than he's in majority of the metas, and he's even rougher in the Gladiator circuit as well. Then America Chavez is a champion that works very well as a double purpose champion, obviously. Number one cool thing about Chavez in reality is she doesn't debuff the opponents at all, and she can go into her heavy attacks from a regular combo. So if you really want to, you never have to trigger Power Snack, which in itself is quite valuable, given the fact that America Chavez now has a very decent damage output. And then the second cool thing is, because of your negative zone, you can completely reverse the Power Snack, and you can actually use it to reduce opponent's power. And that just, again, can enable you to be a bit more aggressive. To be honest, because of the negative zone, I kind of wish she had a debuff in her base kit somewhere, so you could trigger Conflictor on purpose a bit easier rather than reparrying with some sort of offensive action. But still, she definitely is a very solid and suitable offensive champion for both Victory Track and Gladiator Circuit metas. And then, obviously, she can be quite problematic to go up against on defense as well, because if she throws a heavy attack, the fight can go downhill very fast. And the final one I'm still going to mention is Kingpin, because Kingpin does Kingpin things. Really, he's been very solid offensively and defensively just because of extra power gain. You have to be very careful, basically, not to push him to level 2s, or that Unstoppable can be very punishing and also will slow down the fight significantly. And offensively, he just functions very well. In many matchups, you can just straight up go for level 2s and finish that off. He is one of the very few great Spot and Quicksilver counters that we have. And if you really need to, you can also trigger Conflictor, use your level 1 and get in the Degen if need be. But yeah, the fact that he's one of the very few rare skill champions that is extremely versatile and does not necessarily require you to debuff the opponent, it just helps a ton. But ultimately, I'd still say at the moment the MVP overall has been Spot and Juggernaut. Man, Juggernaut has definitely been putting in a ton of work in Victory Track and recently in Gladys Circuit too. But yes, I will not be making a video specifically for this meta in Gladiator Circuit because at the moment there's like 200 people in the Gladiator Circuit. So I might make a video for week 2 meta, but I will be making videos for week 3 and 4 meta for sure because that's typically when there are more and more people in the Gladiator Circuit. Anyways, let me know what you guys think and who have been your personal MVPs for Victory Track and Gladiator Circuit. Obviously, I did not mention Archangel and Human Torch on purpose, as well as, you know, Rintra is still a great defender and Dr. Doom is still in the mix. And then we have, you know, Sasquatch that still does Sasquatch things, and Mephisto can be very dangerous with extra power gain. Those are just kind of, I think, in my head, at the very least, as a staple Mystic defenders or staple kind of like Battlegrounds champions. So unless there is a meta where these champions, you know, are very bad, I'll typically not mention Rintra, Sasquatch, Mephisto, Archangel, and Human Torch, and like Korg, because they're being in everybody's decks in virtually all of the metas. And Nick Fury, I suppose. Anyhow, let me know what you guys think, and I'm going to catch you later. See ya. Hello there guys, and welcome back to the channel. So we have all the information about the next